Hi everyone. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. I see a number of you back, and thanks for joining us for our second last webinar for the ISC 2022. It has been a pretty busy couple of months for everyone, and we are really coming to the end of it now. I hope you aren't already tired of hearing my voice or seeing me, because today it's a whole hour of me. It'll be a whole hour of me, and I'll be sharing a little bit on technical report writing, which is especially helpful for all the people who are participating in the open category. And for those who are in the SARA category that were here for Adi sharing a couple of weeks ago, this is a good part. This is a good session for you to learn how to do proper referencing, which is actually essential for both reports. So you might, for those who attended the last webinar, you might see a little bit of overlap because there are some similarities between an experiment proposal and a technical report writing, but there will be additional information as well. And hopefully I can clarify any of the doubts that all of you have been asking. For all the teams that have been asking me if I can send them a template, hopefully this helps you when you're writing your report, which all of you should be starting to do soon, because we are in the final month before submission. Yeah, but I won't nag you guys because I'm not your parent, but yeah. Let me just jump into things for tonight. Hopefully this won't take too long, so I can at the end of it address questions either regarding the report writing, experiment proposal, anything, or even any other administration things you might want to ask about the International Space Challenge, because you can ask it today. Yeah, so let me jump into things. Okay, so it will be a little bit technical, not to say technical, but it will be a little bit wordy today because it's a lot about how you format. What we're trying to do here is to teach you how to write a proper report, proper professional looking report, noting your how to write for an audience that is either in the scientific community or not in the scientific community. So I think the most important thing before we start everything is that to know who you are writing your paper for. So obviously, all of you are writing your paper for a panel of experts and judges, but you should also take note that all your experts and judges, not all your experts and judges have the same backgrounds. If you have looked at who our experts are and who our judges will be, you will know that they all come from various backgrounds, and they have different expertise, even though they all fall within the space industry. So what you should do is when you're writing your report, take note of who your audience is. Okay, what I mean by that is, firstly, in the case of ISC 2022, not all our experts are engineers. So if you're going to write a very engineering focused report, that is perfectly fine, because that is the goal of ISC, of the ISC challenge statement, which is for the open category, as well as the SAR category, you are required to be a little bit technical, but to not use an excessive amount of lingo that non-engineers or non-space experts would not be able to understand, right? So that's the very first thing, like before you start writing any report, to keep in mind who your audience is. So today what I'll be going through is your formatting, an overview of what your technical report should look like, as well as referencing. Okay, this is very crucial. Our judges over the years have been very strict on this. If there is any kind of plagiarism, whether it's intentional or accidental, you are likely to not do very well. Okay, it's almost considered an immediate failure, and this is the case whether you are taking part in a challenge or even in university. And I can tell you, for people who have never written a technical report, referencing is always the thing that bites them in the ass. It really I have seen a lot of people who have submitted reports and unintentionally, unknowingly, because they don't know how to properly reference their sources, get accused of plagiarism, and that is an instant failure for a lot of universities. So yes, so that part very, very important. So formatting, okay. Firstly, for the open category, your limit is 30 to 50 pages. We have a very strict page limit, meaning that anything above 50 pages gets immediately cut out. So whether or not you have anything above 50 pages, whether or not it's important to your report, it will be cut out. Whether it's one paragraph, 1 page, 10 page, do not exceed 50 pages. Our experts have over 100 reports to read. They will not bother to read anything over that is not following the guidelines. Do use Times New Roman just to standardize everything across the board. Times New Roman, size 12, double spacing, and please paginate all your papers, okay? But the putting page numbers on there is also a way to number your pages, which I will talk a little bit about in the table of contents. But yes, numbering your pages is important. So as you see in the slide, the 30 to 50 pages excludes the title page, the table of contents, your bibliography, your appendix, and your annex. What goes into your appendix and what goes into your annex? Your appendix is where you have information that is referred to in your main document, but not crucial. You can put it in your appendix. An annex is where you can offer any additional information that you think might be useful to the reader, but does not play any kind of important role in your main paper. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. A lot of people in past years have tried to use their appendix and their annex as a way to cheat on the page number, meaning that they throw a lot of the information that they want, and then they just in the main documents they refer to appendix or refer to annex A. No, do not do that. Okay. Things that can go into your appendix could be tables of data that may not necessarily be that may take up a lot of space in your main report, but would be nice for the reader to refer to in the case that they would like. So if you want to have like a table of data that you had where you did maybe calculations or formulas or things like that you feel do not need to be in your main paper, you can put it there. However, if your data contains crucial information that is directly referred to in your report, then yes, it needs to be in your main paper, okay? So don't use your appendix as a way to squeeze in your 50 pages. I can tell you it will not work very well to you. Also, by the way, please justify your pages, okay? On this point, justifying your pages, I will maybe run through some features of Word document later if you guys do not know, but do justify your paragraphs because that makes things a lot easier to read. So the overview of a technical report. So a technical report essentially has 11 main components. So much longer than an experiment proposal if you were there for the experiment proposal sharing. Includes your title page, an abstract, or also otherwise known as an executive summary, your table of contents, an introduction, your literature review, the main body of your paper, figures, tables, equations, formula, lastly, the conclusions and recommendations, your bibliography, appendix, and then your annex. So this is the format that you should be following. Generally, you don't really change from this order. I don't think you can really change from this order. However, there is some flexibility within the body itself, but I will go into that a little bit later on. So I'm going to try to bit through this part because the next coming parts are quite intuitive. So if at any point of time maybe you might not catch anything I say, or something doesn't make sense to you, just feel free to call it out in the Q&A and I can jump back. So firstly, your title page, straightforward, your project title, your team name and the full name of all your members, as well as the date that you submitted the paper. So this is very important, especially if you're writing original content, because this is how we use to prevent your paper from being plagiarized, because you can always date the reports, date your reports. So yeah, the date of your submission. You don't need to get, so I know some people have asked whether they can include logos, whether they can include photos. You can. I don't mind if you include maybe if you've done your own team logo, or if you've done a couple of like images that you want to put on your title page, you want to make it pretty. You're free to do that. I would say as long as the main information is clearly represented and easy to read, and the images doesn't distract from anything else or kind of hide anything, then that is perfectly fine with me. We will actually be sending all the teams a form that you need to fill up, which includes the name of your members and everything like that, before you submit your report together with the project submission report. So that should help with a little bit. The next part that you should come on the next page, this will be the only thing on that page, right? It will be your abstract or executive summary. So an abstract or executive summary should include a brief overview of your project. It should state the outcomes or the possible findings, because in this case here, we are doing a hypothetical project, as well as any recommendations for improvements to your projects, or any improvements that you think you can improve on in the projects for future people who maybe reference your work can consider, right? So academic community, we are very helpful to one another. We do, I think it's important to highlight what were the strengths of your project as well as what your project failed to address. Because as we all know, the industry is research is never ending. There is a lot of new things to study, and especially a topic like space weather. We are, I think in one of the very earlier webinars, Dr. Gang Kai actually mentioned that there is an endless amount of unresearched topics within the field. So yeah, include all the key information that your readers need to make a decision without them having to read your full report. So this is very important, because this is basically your executive summary or abstract serves as a hook for the judges or experts to read your paper. They should be able to read your executive summary and be intrigued by what you have found, and then it would motivate them to continue reading your paper. Like I mentioned, they have to read over 100 reports. If they are all 30 to 50 pages long, it's going to be quite exhausting. And at some point, the judges are definitely going to skim over some papers that may not necessarily interest them. So your executive summary is extremely important. It should not exceed 200 words. Also, so 200 words, it should summarize everything. A good tip for people who are writing this, even though it's the first thing that you read, it should be the last thing that you write. This is because only then you would have a very good idea of what your project looks like, and which are the points that you need to pull out. Yeah. Next, the table of contents. So the table of contents, a lot of people overlook. It's meant to help your reader find things as easily as possible. So you do use informative headings and careful numbering of sections and subsections. So I'm listing here an example of what is a good table of content. So why is this table of content, or why do I personally find this table of content very good? Each section is clearly labeled. So you do have a good background, so you can see introduction, background, and literature review, and then it gets broken down into smaller sections. So subsections actually help to, so if your literature review, which I will talk a little bit more later, is quite chunky. So a literature review is actually usually a very wordy part of your report. they can take up numerous pages. But yeah, so you might want things that to break down your literature review into sections based on the literature that you're researching. I personally like I know some table of contents don't dot their or don't line up their page numbers. I personally like this because it's easier to read, especially if your table of contents is extremely long. It's easier to trace the page number to the section. What would count as a bad table of contents is if you have everything just collapsed into one block. So if like your literature review is 10 pages long, but you only have just say literature review, and then it says here page 6, and then the next section is your body, and then it's page 16, right? So your reader would know that your literature review is about 10 pages long, and I personally would not be very motivated to read an entire section of literature 10 pages long. So you do want to help to narrow down to certain things. It also helps the judges to pinpoint certain areas that they might want to go back and refer to. For example, if you have tables on certain pages, or if they're reading your report. So just to kind of go off tangent a little bit, for a lot of people in academia, the way we address a technical report or any academic paper is first we read the abstract, then we read the introduction, and then we read the conclusion, and then after that we go into the different details. So the reason we read the introduction and the conclusion first is because we want to get a better idea of what the project covered before we go in and try to read everything. It makes things a lot easier to read. So sometimes if you are reading a lot of paper, you might read the introduction, the conclusion, and then try to find specific areas that interest you. So maybe in the conclusion, you mention something about a specific finding that the reader gets very intrigued about. The reader would then go to the table of contents and try to refer to that finding section to go and read more about it. So they may still not necessarily read your entire paper at one shot, but you want to make it as easy to navigate through it as possible. Next thing is the introduction. So your introduction typically should provide context for the problem being addressed. So address the challenge statement that you're trying to, basically this is the ISC challenge statement. Discuss the relevant previous research that have been done in the area. So I'm guessing, so for example, if we're talking about satellite missions that have gone to study space weather, you can talk about the Van Allen probes, different satellites that have gone there. Our experts have shared in previous webinars the various satellite missions in this area, and then state your objective, state what you are trying to do for your project, for your own project. So while writing your introduction, you can consider a couple of questions. Firstly, what are you investigating? We have left the challenge statement quite open, as we usually do. So you feel free to narrow it down as much as possible or as much as you like. What were the previous studies that were found in the area, and how does your project fit into these studies? Meaning that when you are reading through the literature, what are the gaps, right? What are the gaps that you found, and then how does your project address those gaps? So what makes your project different from other people? Like what makes it unique? Why are you doing this? Are you trying to prove something? Obviously, we are not doing, if you're going to just copy another project, there's really not much point in doing it. So there should be something, there should be a motivation behind the project that you're doing. And what is it about? And lastly, which is probably the most important part, is why are you doing it and what do you expect to learn from it? So the why are you doing it doesn't always have to be very scientifically driven. I think we shared, Ali and I shared this in the previous webinar, where your motivations can be personal, it can be scientific, it can be, as long as you have a proper justification of why you want to do it, right? If it's so it should be something that excites you. Most importantly, it should excite you, right? Otherwise, if it's a project that doesn't excite you to start with, you're going to find it very tedious to work through the entire thing. literature review. So this is the part that a lot of people tend to overlook. I don't know why, but it seems to be a very common thing. Literature review. How do you write a good literature review? Firstly, narrow down your topic. So this is where your these questions come in very handy. What are you investigating? What are the areas that what is making your project different? Where do you find the gaps? So narrow down your topic and select your papers accordingly. Search for the literature. So when you narrow down your topic, find keywords, pick out keywords that you think could be helpful. So in this, to be very general, it would be like literature about space weather. If you search literature about space weather, you're going to get endless reports, right? So try to narrow it down so that your literature becomes a bit more focused. Like I mentioned, the way to help you filter through endless literature would be to read the abstract, read the introduction, read the conclusion. And then if you find that the abstract, introduction, and conclusion offers information that you think could be useful to your own paper, then you pick that literature and then read through it thoroughly and evaluate the paper as a whole. Okay. It's a tedious process. It's a tedious process. It's often the process that a lot of people struggle with the most because it's exhausting. I know, like I've been there. It's exhausting to write a good literature review, but it helps a lot because it's going to give you a lot of background information that you need when addressing your issues in your project. Because if you are going to go in blind without reading any of the previous literature, it's going to be very quickly obvious when you're doing your project to an expert who has read a lot of these papers. You're gonna find issues that come up in your paper that previous papers have already found, which is not to say that wrong, but if you're going into it blindly, then it's clear that it becomes very clear that you have not done any previous research on it. A good literature review should take up approximately 10% of your paper. 10% is a very chunky part of your paper, which a lot of people feel like they cannot bear to commit that number of pages. So in a 50-page report, it will be 3 to 5 pages, I would say, for this, for the ISC paper, your literature review should take up. But it's worth committing the time to it. Even if a lot of judges may not read through it thoroughly, because literature is something that is, like I said, tedious to do. But knowing that you have done your research is going to help a lot. The body. So this is the part where it gets very flexible. The body is structured around according to the needs of your reader, as well as the nature of your project. So this is where it gets a little bit iffy in terms of the formatting. So some of you are going to do very engineering heavy reports or very engineering heavy, maybe projects focusing on the design of the satellite. So if you're going to be focusing on the design of the satellite, you're going to want sections that include sketches of your drawing or like model images. You're going to want to talk about the different components of your satellite, etc., etc., etc. Right? But if you are going to be working on the internals, the internal components of a satellite. So if you're going to focus instead on the internal components of your satellite, such as maybe the coding, the programming, trying to do a unique programming to send something on like your payload, things like that, you're going to have parts, sections that are going to be talking about how your code operates, how your code, the issues that your code faces, things like that. I know some of you, if you're doing the MEXA report, like, so if you're trying to use the MEXA Earth satellite imagery, the imagery to incorporate into your report, you're going to have a section that's going to be wanting to compare data, space weather data to your findings from the satellite images. So how you structure the body is entirely up to you. I can't really give you a proper template for this specific part because it's going to vary from team to team, and I don't want you to take a template and then find that it doesn't work for your team very well and then, you know, struggle through trying to force it into that template. So I'm going to instead give you some questions to think about when you are writing this part of your project. Firstly, you want to know what your reader needs to know first. So think of it in an orderly manner. If you were someone who, think of it as from the perspective of someone who's reading a paper for the first time, it needs to be in an order that where it builds, right? So if you're going to be talking about the build of the satellite, you want to start from the outside, maybe work your way in. So each component working its way down one layer or something like that. Yeah, so develop a story with your project, essentially, is what I'm trying to say, in a way that makes sense. This is where it helps to get people who are not working on your project to read through, or maybe people who, so I know, so the way projects work, I guess maybe some people might be working on a specific chapter or a specific part of the paper. So get someone who has not read that part yet to review your parts and get them to give you that feedback. That will be immensely helpful when you can get a external, so basically peer review, get a peer to review your papers and review your components to make sure that it makes sense. Ask your mother, ask someone who's not an engineer, ask your sister, your siblings, ask your friends who are maybe not in engineering. I used to ask my sister to review my paper. She's from a completely different industry from me, but I made sure that because she's not from the same field as me, I made sure she could understand the paper at least, or at least get a rough idea of what I was trying to say, just to make sure that I was making, so that just to make sure that anyone who reads the paper will be able to understand. This is where kind of you need to look at other technical reports that are similar to what you're doing, would help to see what they've included and in what order. Yeah, so really try to look up some literature that maybe talks about code, like if you're doing software coding, see how they format their body. If you're doing structural engineering, like a mechanical materials engineering thing, look at reports on that as well. There are endless sources online, a lot of databases that allow you to review past reports and everything. Figures, tables, equations, and formula. So this one sometimes is usually a part of your body already. It's not usually an entire section of its own. However, some people do create an entire section just for figures, tables, equations, and formula. It's not necessary. If you find that if separating it from your main body is not helpful, don't. This can be incorporated as part of your body, but things that you should consider when you're including all these things. How you want to best present the information for a reader. So sometimes a block of text is not going to be very helpful to your reader, and you think it could be better presented as a table, a graph, like a couple of figures. Make sure that everything is numbered. So your graphs and everything should always be centralized. Firstly, always centralized. It should be numbered, meaning that and the number should be in running order. Okay, so it's not the table on the page, it's the table in the entire document. So if you have a table on page 1, you have a table on page 10. The table on page 10 is going to be table 2, and the table on page 1 is going to be table 1. So you should give it a number. You should also explain in a single sentence what your table is about. So I could have a graph maybe measuring the age distribution in a population. So it would say table 1, graph age distribution in a country. So it's a very simple single line sentence that explains what your table is about. And then in text, you should refer to it by the table number. So people can always say in table 1 or in table 3. Then people can very easily refer to it. You should not be referring to tables that are several pages away, unless you really have to. Yeah, so if your table 1 is on page 1, you shouldn't be mentioning table 1 on page 10. Unless you're making a comparison. In that case, perhaps it could be a use, but if you were a reader, you wouldn't want to flip from page 1, read into page 10, and then realize you have to flip back to page 1 to try to look at the graph again. So as much as possible, your in-text should be as close to your actual figure or table or equation as possible. Yeah, so like I said, include a simple descriptive label either above or below the figure. Equations and formulas similarly should be numbered, referred to in text as equation 1, etc., centered on the page and on a separate line, meaning it should not be running in text in line with the rest of your paragraph. It should be in its own block. Okay, so the next part, so that's the main part of this. The last part actually is conclusion. There's not much to talk about conclusion. A conclusion is just summarizing all the key points of your technical report, and then also including some recommendations. So like I mentioned in the beginning, is to just highlight things that maybe you could have overlooked in your project. It's never wrong to admit that there are areas while you're working that you find that there were some issues in your project. It's good to highlight those so that when people reading it know that this is not, like, these are the areas that they need to look out for that could potentially be issues if they were going to be using it as a reference for something else, right? So that's just very straightforward, and then that should be your entire technical report. So that's the entire part of the technical report that counts into your page numbers. The next part is referencing. So there are a lot of different referencing styles. There's APA, MLA, Chicago. I think there's like Oxford, something like that. The two that I'm just going to mention two today because these are the two that I think works best for technical reports. MLA, so the two I'm going to be mentioning is APA, or the American Psychological Association style of referencing, and Chicago style of referencing. Things like MLA and the rest typically don't work very well for a technical report. They are more geared towards papers, humanities-based papers like history or languages and things like that. MLA works best for those. So I'm not going to be touching on those. But you can choose between I'm going to be talking about APA and Chicago because I think these are the two that works best in this situation. APA is probably the most popular and the most famous, well-known referencing style, and the one that's most commonly used across universities because it is very straightforward. So when you're doing APA style of referencing, they use an author date system. Meaning to reference it in the paper, you just need to in brackets, put the author and the date. So in the case that you mention the author directly in text, so in this case here, Jenkins described the beginning stages of blah, 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 you only need to bracket the year of the paper. If you are referencing a part without mentioning the author, then you need to just write Jenkins. And likewise, if you are said in an article by whoever in the dated what year, then you don't need to write that. So if there are two authors, you should cite both names every time. So you can, so if, for example, Jenkins and Lee. So you will always need to say Jenkins and Lee, 2003. However, if there are more than two authors, so there are some papers where you can have up to 5, 8 authors working on the same paper. For the first time, you do need to mention every single one of them. So, or at least this is their last names only. So you do not cite the full name, you cite just their last names. You need to cite all of them with a comma between every name, and then put the year. Following that, you just need to say the first author. So in the case, the first author here is Jenkins, then you put Jenkins AL. Subsequently for the rest of it, and then you put the year. The issue with APA is that people sometimes find it can be a bit chunky in text because all the referencing breaks up their text a lot. So that's the one thing people don't really like about APA style of referencing. I, however, find it the most straightforward, the easiest to reference, and a lot of softwares come inbuilt with an automatic referencing system for APA at least. Word actually does for, as far as I know, most most referencing styles, which I can show a little bit later, how you can do it. In your bibliography, how you should state your papers should be the author names. So the author followed their first name, just the first letter, dot, and whatever, bracket the year, bracket the title, subtitle if needed, the edition, and the publisher. So this is just for a book. There are different ways to reference different types, like websites, articles, newspaper articles. Yeah, there are different ways to reference it, but it's very easy to look up online. And if you are using Word doc, which I can show you later, Word document actually gives you the components inbuilt into Word doc already, where you just have to key in the different components and it will organize it for you. Your bibliography should be also organized alphabetically. Yep, so it should be alphabetized. Next one is the Chicago. Chicago tends to be a bit more popular for technical papers because it appears very clean. So in text, all you would see is a small notation at the end of the reference, and then people they use footnotes to identify what the reference is. So in the first time you are mentioning the first time you are citing a new reference, you should do the numbering, and then at the bottom in your footnotes, you should do the full text. So the full as you would in the bibliography. However, moving forward, if you are referencing the same text again, you can shorten it to just the last name and the title. So it would be, in this case, if you are referencing in another part of your paper the same text, you can just say Nate Beautiful Minds. That would be it. So that helps to take out the chunk in the footnote, in your footnote. If your title is more than 5 words long, you can actually even shorten it further to, so in the case, maybe for example, it says it's Silver Nate, Beautiful Minds in a blah, 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 something like that, like something else. You can shorten it to Beautiful Minds, and then it would count as a citation in your footnote. In your bibliography, again, it should be in alphabetical order. Tracy, the only difference here is you can see they don't use brackets. It uses dots, stops in between everything, right? So that is the key point about referencing. It will take some time. It's a tedious process, as I know, for everybody. The good thing is if you're using Word, there's a whole automated system for it. Maybe I can show that later on after this. So last part would be if you're quoting phrases directly, your inline quoted phrases should not exceed 20 words. This is very crucial. Anything more than 20 words gets picked up as plagiarism in plagiarism software, which is very easy to do. So there are a lot of free plagiarism software online that you can just upload your papers to do a quick plagiarism check if you are not sure. But anything more than 20 words gets immediately picked up. Phrases should be placed in quotations. In addition to author and date, you should also include a page number if you're going to be quoting or rephrasing a specific section of the literature. So in the case, like maybe here, this is a specific sentence that's coming from maybe page 20. So in this page here, in this part here, you should also include behind, it should say page 20, PG 20. Yeah, and that's the end of my presentation for this. I have a little bit of time. I don't see much questions yet, so maybe I can just quickly share with you how you could use Word to do referencing. Okay, so I've opened up a blank document on Word here. The way you can do referencing is very simple if you haven't already seen. So firstly, go to References, and then Insert Citation. Add a new source. So if this you're using Word. So for me, it's already set to APA. You can change your setting here, so you can see up here they have APA. If you want to use Chicago, you just use Chicago. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend any of the others. It's Harvard, MLA. These are not really good for a technical report. So I will stick to either APA or Chicago. So I'm just going to use APA for this, just to show you. If you add a new source, it will tell you, it will ask you the type of source. So you can just drop down here, book section, journal article in the periodical, conference proceedings, report, website, document from a website, electronic, art, sound recording, performance, film. You have an endless. They have done a very good job of trying to cover different kinds. In this case, maybe I'm going to say a journal article because that's slightly the most popular or the most frequent sort of referencing you are likely to use. Here you put all your author names. Just input it, put in all your author names, the title of the paper, the journal name. So a lot of journal articles are part of a larger journal. So it could be like the Journal of Space, NASA Scientific Journal or something like that. The year it was published and the page. So they even give you the examples here of how you should examples here of how you would look like. So Adventure Works Monthly, title, how to write bibliographies, etc. So it's very automatic here. And then the nice thing about this is that once you've input the citation, it records it. So when you finish your paper at the end, all you have to do is click bibliography, and then it inserts for you, right? So it gives you a format that you might want. So you can either call it bibliography, references, works cited, up to you. We don't really mind whichever. And then you can just insert bibliography at the end of your report, and it will compile all your references and do it for you. So you don't need to go back and type in one by one every single reference that you have or every single citation that you've done, because God knows you wouldn't know, you wouldn't remember by the end of it, by the end of writing a 50-page paper. But yeah, so you can, the nice thing about it is it does automatically do it for you. In the case of Chicago, I've never used Chicago for this, so I'm not sure. It's the same, like the input. I'm not sure if it includes the footer for you automatically on Word doc, because I've never done it with Chicago. But in the case that it doesn't, you can insert footnote. So you insert footnote here, and then this is where you can type in your reference or your citation, right? So yeah, that is basically it for the Word document. Do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. I hope that means you guys understand, and not because you are very lost to the point that you don't know what questions to ask. Yeah, so if you have any questions, I'm just gonna jump because I don't want, oh, I see a question. How does a technical report differ from a normal report? It depends on what you are talking about when you say a normal report. So technical reports tend to have allows you to include, when we say technical report, especially in academia, it's a very specific format, which is the format that we shared with you. It depends on the kind of report you're writing. So for example, if you saw Adi's experiment proposal writing, so a proposal is a kind of report. A proposal has a different a proposal has a different format because you have a different motivation behind the proposal, which is that you want people to fund your project. It typically tends to be shorter, but a technical report is a very specific format. It's a very specific format, and they don't necessarily so in this case, for you guys, it means that you need to include all your calculations, your equations. You wouldn't do that in a lot of general reports, basically. Where can we access past technical reports from the past winners? I think if you are in the Discord, they have Jacob and Surya in the Discord, and they have shared their paper a couple of times. I think we also have it linked on our website, although I have to check the link because from what I understand, they shifted their report to a different site, but we can update the link on that. Someone's confused about the difference between annex and appendix. Okay, so appendix, like I mentioned, is information that maybe is not crucial to your report, but is referenced, but you don't necessarily need. So assuming that you are, yes, so you should also put in your financial report as one of the components in your technical report. So a financial report will make up a part of your body that comes at the end before your conclusions and your recommendations. So anyway, sorry, I got a bit distracted. Back to the appendix and annex. An appendix, so an example of what goes into an appendix and annex. Assuming you are, okay, so assuming we are collecting data, you are referencing a couple of, you are using a set of data as your reference to isolate certain thing about space weather, but the data is mostly for you to notice patterns. So you convert that table into that table of data into maybe a very simplified graph, so that it's easy to just track the patterns in your report. However, you can reference that you have used the data from this table and put it in your appendix. So because, I don't know, so for a lot of technical reports, for a data to be counted as sufficient or not, basically there should be enough data, you need at least 100, if I'm not wrong, it's at least 100 data sources. Meaning you need to generate, if you are just generating numbers, you need to have 100 numbers in it. And that can be a very long table, which if you are working with a very tight page limit, you do not want to put a table with just a list of 100 numbers into your main report. But you can say that from your data findings, you managed to, you convert that table into a graph, into a single graph, and then you said, this is what we found. However, if you want to look at the data specifically to make sure that it was accurate, you can refer to Appendix 1. So you put that data into Appendix 1 so that they can reference it if needed or if they want to. An annex would be information that is completely, not say irrelevant to your report, but it could be additional information that a reader might want to know about. So if you are collecting data that is not yours, so maybe if you're referencing it, if you want using open source NASA data that they can easily access online, you can put that into your appendix. So you can say things like, or you can put things in like your draft sketches, maybe into your annex. So if you are working on if you're doing a project where you are designing the hardware of a satellite or the design of a satellite, and it went through many iterations of the design, and you think that maybe it could be interesting for the judge to look through how your design progressed, you can put the sketches or the design process into your annex, right? So if they look at it, like if they don't look at it, it's fine, because then they know what your final project looks like. However, if they're interested and they're going to look in your annex and it'd be like information that is interesting, information that is interesting to see, but then not necessarily important to your main report. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple of other questions coming up. No, so experiment proposal. The experiment proposal is for the starter category, and the technical report is for the open category. So if you are in the starter category, you only have to write a experiment proposal, and if you're in the open category, just write a technical report. We have the guidelines in the information deck that I believe we sent all of you when you first registered for the challenge. Yeah, so those detail what you need to, the guidelines that you need to follow. Some research papers have very long captions for figures and schematics. When they explain the model, they show in the figure. Are we doing that, or should we have only one short sentence in the caption? The caption typically shouldn't be too long. It should only be one sentence. It should be very brief. In the case that your very brief sentence cannot explain what your figure is about, then you may, it's allowed. It's not like it's not like if you write more than one sentence to explain your figure, you're gonna fail or you're gonna get discredited. It's just the sentence there is just meant for the reader to understand what your graph is supposed to be about. The longer captions for figures and schematics that explain the model that they show in the figure should actually be in text. But maybe you're collecting very complicated data that needs a bit more explanation, then it's okay if your caption is a bit longer. Following the 10% rule mentioned earlier, do you have any tips on compressing the literature review to 1 to 1.5 pages only for the style category? For style category, because you're writing an experiment proposal, you don't really need literature review per se, but it's good to have some background about what you are doing. Like I mentioned in your literature review, the way you do it is to narrow down find the key literature review that is useful to your report. Pick out. So my supervisor in university used to tell me how to summarize a literature review. In the case where you are very tight for pages, the way you do is you reference the paper. So it will say like in this journal article or in this paper or by this author, this mentioned, summarize their entire paper as much as possible into 2 to 3 sentences. So your first sentence is what the project is about. The second sentence is what it found. And the third sentence is the conclusion. So it should be, if you're saying like, Gillian, bracket 2003, went to investigate the effects of bringing cheese to space, for example. So that is what the paper was about. Then you go into what they found. Found that bringing cheese to space, bringing cheese to space developed more faster, or something like that. And then what was their conclusion? So just summarize it into 3 sentences for every literature that you find. Of course, if you have pages if you have literature that's like maybe extremely long, it's going to be very hard for you to try to narrow down to just 3 sentences. But yes. Is the report written in single spacing or double spacing between lines? It's double spacing. So for whoever asked that, it will be double spacing. I know double spacing seems like a lot. Double spacing seems like a lot, but it really makes things a lot easier for people to read when you have a lot of text. And that is the standard for, I believe, universities across the board. So we're just trying to prepare you guys if you are in university or going to university for how to write a report. So at least when you get around to that, you guys have a good idea of how to write a proper report. Sometimes I think some places nowadays say 1.5 suffice, but I think across is still 2 double line spacing. Yeah. Okay, that is the last of our questions. I will jump into our announcements now. Of course, if you have any other questions that come up. Is there a technical report template that we can refer to? I just shared with you the template, guys. We will be uploading this webinar onto LearnNet, onto our Speak Faculty learning platform, so you can refer to it if you need the template. The template is basically I can share it again if you need to, just to give you an overview. Hold on, where is it? This is your template, guys. This is how you should format your technical report. Right? But yeah, so I will jump into a couple of, I'll put this up here so you guys can look at it, memorize it, take it all in. But let me just pull up some of my notes so that I don't forget anything. We do have quite a number of announcements to get through today. So, like I mentioned, this is the second last ISC webinar for this year. The last one will be taking place this Friday, 8:30 p.m. Singapore time. The topic it'll be run by one of our experts, Mr. Francois Dubrul, and he'll be talking about financing for space missions. So if any of you are struggling with your financial report or understanding what goes into costing for a space mission, that's a very good webinar for you to attend. It will be the last webinar for this year. However, it won't be the last event for this year. We will actually be hosting a virtual year-end party on the 17th of December. We are taking a couple of weeks off from doing any webinars. So the year-end party is right before the submission deadline, guys. Submission deadline is the 22nd of December. The year-end party is meant for you to address any last-minute concerns if you have. Although I hope you don't have too many concerns 1 week before your submission deadline. And so any last-minute concerns, as well as an opportunity for you to meet with other participants. It will be a virtual party, so there will be games, there will be quizzes. We will have some of our sponsors there to share about what it's like to work in their companies. And so maybe if you're interested in looking for internships or jobs, guys, this is a great opportunity for you to come and learn more about the different space industry companies that we have in not just Singapore, but just around in the industry. So we do have a couple of our sponsors coming down from various backgrounds. Submission for ISC 2022. Submission deadline is 22nd December. We do have a very strict submission deadline. I know some of you have emailed me about asking for an extension. We are reviewing your request. We are not heartless people, but we do actually have a very tight timeline that we need to follow. So if we cannot grant you the extension, please understand. We are working with our experts. We are working with our industry professional experts' schedules. It is the holiday season, so it's a bit difficult for them to maybe move their schedules around if you submit late. So it would be, we're reviewing it on a case-by-case basis at the moment. But yes, if you have submitted a request for an extension, I have seen it. If I have not replied to you yet, it's because we are still reviewing it. But yeah, so if we cannot grant you an extension, please understand. We know you've been working very hard in your projects, and as much as we want to accept all papers and give you guys the opportunity to address, to submit the best work you can. But unfortunately, deadlines exist, and we work on different schedules. I have a couple of questions. SSTL said single space for both star and open category. There might have been an error on our part. Please take double spacing as double spacing. Is it better to write in a stiff technical tone for the judges, or will a more engaging style be appreciated? I'm wondering the letter might come across as too informal or off-putting. Honestly, I cannot say that there's a strict writing style. It's really, I feel like nowadays it's okay if you are a little informal. Informal, not bad grammar. As long as it's easy to read, it's engaging. So just because it's a stiff, just because it's very technical doesn't necessarily mean it cannot be engaging. But I will leave the writing style up to you, to whatever you guys are comfortable with. Just take note of your grammar. Proofread, guys. I've seen a lot of people who pull the midnight, who rush their papers out at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. overnight, go without sleep for several nights, and then they don't proofread. And then they submit papers where you can tell that they clearly pulled several all-nighters to write. Always proofread your paper. If you are too tired to proofread your paper, get someone to proofread your paper. They don't have to understand it. They just need to be able to identify any grammatical errors. Yeah. Yeah, that is it for the ISC news. We do have a couple of other news. Let me quickly share. So we are running a virtual space coding course this December, 13 to 17 December. It will be an online coding bootcamp that will teach you the basics of Arduino Studio and Java to code autonomous flying robots on the International Space Station. So this is a very interesting coding program. So you might have background in coding, but this is a little bit different from what we typically do from your standard Python programming class. What we're trying to do here is for you to help you understand what it's like to code robots, autonomous flying robots in a zero gravity environment. So what are the considerations that you need to take note of? What are the complexities? Java, I understand, is not a language that's familiar to a lot of people, but Java is actually a coding program that's very popular on the ISS. So yeah, if you guys are interested in learning how to code, I believe the course is going, the bootcamp is going at $55 per person. I don't know if someone in the, if I mean, you might be able to correct me on that. But yes, the coding is course is going for $55 per person. It's a 5-day program, 10 attribution, and quite intensive. Yeah, otherwise, that is all I have to share with you guys for today. I am slightly overrun. Hopefully that's okay with you guys. But yes, if we don't have any other questions, that is it for tonight or this evening. So I hope you guys all have a good rest of the week. And yeah, and a good evening if you are. Right, okay, yes, course fee is $55. I was correct. Yeah, so if you guys are interested, check out our website for more information on the space coding course. Yeah, and I hope to see you guys on Friday's webinar and for the year-end party, which we will send more information out closer to the date. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, if you need to reference the format again, as usual, just keep a lookout on the learning platform for the recording when it's up. Thank you, Carl. See you guys.